All right, step prep. 235 used. Send it.
All right, it should be sent. Have you all gotten it?
I got the email. Just give me a sec to open it.
Yeah, same.
All right. All right. I'm going to start in 5 seconds unless someone verbally objects. Oh, I need an order. Advantage 1, advantage 2, T protection / its devolution, state, the advantage counterplan, the K, the Son Politics DA, the Title 42 DA. All right, now I'll start in 5 seconds. Advantage 1 is he will not proceed if more regulations proceed. If Biden's proving gridlock 30 pipelines through immediately once states get the vetoes are lifted, proves it proceed well. And 1C2 doesn't take states years to let states leave vetoes immediately. Evidence is 50 pipelines are already built, just waiting for approval. 1C3 EU spending billions of months for improving finances. War for the Ukraine ban on coal was like 1% of total sanctions, exempted oil and gas. 1C4 no causes Trump is gone. We specific evidence for China style besides we have brink evidence from like 2022. And 1C5 yes brink acid pilot who we can't replace China's LNG supply, which is critical for increasing independence. We can't export now because they're still buying from Russia absent and much more increased U.S. prices. Yes, China war opposed it turns over and how independence moves lost main view and military renews plan saws by proving U.S. China pipelines increase independence, increase cost of conflict massively. That's what I see government defenses great since they're escalating now after more check who's our scenario for conflict, which they can see at least the nuclear war. Yes, Russia war, they're criminally outdated. Ukraine conflict is financed by European oil buys. Russia says Ukraine deserves horizontal escalation, moving NATO intervention, Netherlands strikes Norway in the Baltic in order to throw NATO disarray with activities, which activates Article 5 and goes nuclear. Plan saws for removing European dependence on Russian gas to increase LNG exports. It hauls at Putin's war chest and military reduces oil revenues, which drive escalation. As for the Leville evidence, the turn it doesn't exist. Biden's promise, the Biden promise Freeman was talking about is his original promise to export 50 billion LNG to Europe. That's really what the plan is. Key to it's impossible. I want to see 9 doesn't matter. It's not EU stability, but increasing EU cohesion in this world because they need high defense to stop a long-term Russia threat, which goes nuclear because even if it does go nuclear now, Russia's escalating every 2 years. It would test Europe again in like 2027, which is my higher chance it would say go nuclear. 1C10, yes, EU collapse disputes over Russian oil now because a lot of Putin factions law because he with billions of dollars in oil buys. Proven by things like Viktor Orban and Poland, Viktor Orban who's relying on Russian gas. Advantage 2, 1C1, we saw for higher energy guns. We don't we need to win a spillover claim beyond it because all our scenarios about hybrid energy governance. 1 and C2, again, no spillover needed. Yeah, yes, grid collapse. 30 methods possible, multiple attacks happening once. Hybrid energy governance solves for innovative federal solution with interstate, which insulates the grid for 17 down efforts. Goes nuclear because the U.S. perceives it as a military doubt. 1 and C, yes, warming impact, high chance of escalation, adaptation. Defenses talk about the temperature effects of warming, not the escalating crisis and stocks with overwhelming human ability to adapt, cause massive resource nuclear wars. In the interim, the CCS bad stuff. No link. We are on CCS. Any links in the blog means you want our answers. Cheap protection. We meet. The app protects water resources from adverse impacts of LNG facilities. Expands for considerations. We meet. States tell the Fed what protection to do. The federal government is the one doing it. States are still going to be preempted under the National Gas Act from actually doing it, but the federal government is the one who takes the protection and implements it by balancing federal and state consideration. Means that the Fed doing the plan. We meet protection. Circumvents hour to a secret. We very likely fit the use of pipelines through FERC. This is T states that they recontextualize any responses. Devolution. Permutation to the plan. Permutation do and devolve over something else. In Texas sort of below. Permutation to the CARA plan. We can classify the deficits already below. And delegations and possibly even authority over pipelines to provide states who have the eminent domain rights means they literally can't build pipelines. Reject devolution. Have to destroy African ways to hate on the Fed key ones and jurisdictions simply trade that destroys resource class and fairness. Reject the team to her future introduction. Immediacy. States have developed several regimes that impact occurs in the meantime. Answer any key internal links predict off LNG's ability to predict new permits or issues. State limitation of fall through. Divots follow roads or wrenching gears out of my future investment. That's class. States kind of plan. Perm to both. Shields politics being proceeded popular. Perm to the kind of plan. It's way the plan can be that. Perm to all plan combinations. Links in the method cause political confusion about mechanism. Also, like all overnight benefits are obviously controversial because like fucking taxes. Can't solve advantage one if you're getting a single process disprove release states unless we apply pipelines. Prop 11. Hey, say we measure temporary after energy free process under law and against domestic especially will require union after DMP law to state law and to shall by any with water within one is license government approves. Having the states remove themselves from processing pipeline development for occurrences, not care local regulation that cause massive local opposition pipelines and administrative failures. Everyone says hey, more natural gas for state also reduce the second more far zero energy improvements are government local process source innovation how about cheap energy security I mean avoid water concerns hey focus that events or any vital part of CO2 action so LNG flow over KBC the policies announcing video pressure related safety and terrorism for the unaccommodated these safety guns are addressed I'm concerned to be fierce LNG policy quality I'm in the terminals to public opposition and be reflect on opposition industrial party state governments arbor help government state public utilities right electricity natural gas by local cost the African energy efficiency for global when interview for more constitutional and state loss and next to $40 billion can't solve for clear federal sins of course the evidence is that state regimes result in external schemes that destroys market for volume exports advantage to its offense carved federalism requires interrogation state and federal regulation with for confusion out you know obviously that cause more conflict basic cooperation or energy position doesn't solve our evidence says getting regulators involved on the front is key federalism CWA's fraction point that's when cooperation mandate emission reductions fail we don't enable hydrogen fuel transition with the key to zero emissions certainty deficit counterplans the best least problems and state energy leaders won't follow it 50 state Vietnam's voting should destroy the based on predictable shields the entirety of the average team for deterrence also like this multi-plank advantage kind of play makes it literally impossible to the app with infinite playings with no we can't answer at the advantage kind of plan permanent bow second permanent cap permanent all any combination of planes topical kind of plans of voting issue the seal out from kill fairness topic education boost we never get to core question the resolution and at least net benefit obviously linked to politics but these unprecedented federal action no neck via no should not the resolution is not topical all their normal justifications are bad potential counterplans are infinite cause substance kind of we just debate permutations in theory which is not substance conditionality is a voter issue one reciprocity we can't get a straight turns to obviously but you can get a straight turns this second clash they're getting the counterplans to make it answer bootstraps advocacy still this public condition straight turning solves doesn't solve warming evidence is casual reduction evidence is necessary for hydrogen domestic reserve LNG doesn't matter if we can't export it pipelines get exported military cooperation with NATO does nothing even NATO fraction internally key to get off Russian gas no evidence is cooperative safer won't solve the K framework way the Africans federal authority ensuring the resolution only for states who key inference of past permanent vote permanent case with NCL perfect on the IR related DAs voter against forces that double turns reject the team represent rarity backs to 5 there's underlying language has given like purpose and sharp is not used for credible whole what I say when never change their heads and institution that work and hard community regardless language extra bad ones so Jason the case and reason drag really feel firm by like recognize value percentage differences that espouses Abraham 17 a number of thoughts team realism manifestation failure and ethical fundamentally racist spirit part not to realist insights highlight shared especially school last war team sound class and violence that realist regulate to house power community not reject letters of the authorized status whether peace converse from version white language unethical tradition motor some really realist all the absurd complex really narrative that are not ethical policy programs Martha Carter programs realist is best understand nuances of affairs what a team is each thing is really quarters so straightforward realist to parties with the dot and focus on power to bring each team for slide research to survive the youth thing realist can be asked what we can understand no wait we are parties like the nation state what about preventing global extinction which affects everyone not just the United States federal government and the all field Russia's already warming and causes extinction there's no way the all can solve it just rejecting the thought doesn't mean anything and you can't like cause kumbaya movement everyone like world peace kind of plan like that'd be ridiculous the DA Son is doomed Republicans Democrats lobbying but recess means a trade-off held for 18 made her parties were water to come out as a rewritten question who was on comment for any police article Democrats to find the votes in Russian moderate so from all the rest of us on the tax claim she would censor writing media times and more from every for all 50 Democrats by the way all over 17 majorities like the majority saw Congress and do we receive that pretty girl on the floor I was sometimes started their tax now Republicans committee one supported Democratic comments and decided federal article come out list of 2030 one country positive and trying to lose America test their mention face re-election as an Iranian home release from college we're not going to focus on greatest political impact escalating towards the largest American citizen favoring great tech among the large coalition Hispanic groups one of them but about future policy at least 7-4-10 but use protest by being old school uses response to emergency first and orders on God's policies gets the value quickly if you don't use when you have to set my name destination increasing the one particular insertion jobs as a small step, but step 3 minus learn from or if you're an budget, everyone wants more pipelines, driving the oil, Democrats want fuel companies increase production. Around 47, I consider number of with the local water, almost more lower gas prices, 7% more fuels with Europe. Democratic oil guns and have prices diebacks on the lower gas prices increase production. All be about one spice more fossil production companies using their part to ramp up production boxes, cars, coming around fast, getting fossilization infrastructure, not coming from America's basic for gas. Via solves the link plan happens immediately, being no political controversy, only a risk of a link turn, more and margin one facilitation, nothing against concession on gas drillings, all 3 and 4. Mentioned about reviving climate social spending oil administration for oil and gas policy to make more palatable, LSU moving around watch by to make content related log, PC topics, Ukraine, ECA, etc. And so we're not keen, and so not ready, but 22, if you're regulation, actually, I skip that. Title 42, domestic energy protection is popular. Harvard 317, new point is that 7% American real estate battery week increase energy production American American wants to have into replacement for the Honeywell voters on Americans bet for American British energy. Republicans are explicitly linking titles to COVID release, won't link to the F, made them read them inside any of the rules, zones 4 states, Republicans are linking to American water coronavirus, putting more targeting Title 42 as an artery, but should be leaders in need for operations of government leverage, which government with this kind of critical mass, how Democrats handle that mechanism, bring a high coverage overseas, cost by paying popular, the two theses of the because someone want to have more except us to move. And trolling to Joe says it's an instance of ILO violation, not key instance, Guantanamo, CIA operations, refugee projects, all of this vanity. There are 5 treaties. The U.S. violates like hundreds of treaties all the time, and the 5 treaties are violated by much of the nations who also explored Title 42 exclusion programs during the pandemic. And ILO fails. Boston 9. Forces driven by Congress, China, Congress, President, interprets, even terminate treaties obligation, even major government center, I mean, I'll Congress, part of the war treaties, never even after challenge the president may take such action, humanity may force the treaties, and binding characters illusory.
Ready?
Yep.
Let's talk about TITS. The we meet is that the plan has the federal government enforce the protection. Can you explain what you mean by the Fed does it beyond just enforcement?
So the way the plan operates is not like the federal government gives states permission to enforce the environmental regulations. It's that states can give input to the federal government who then balances state concerns with the federal environmental concerns. And then the federal government uses its own enforcement authority to do the plan. So for example, it will be the DOJ bringing prosecutions for violations.
Does the plan fiat that the DOJ or I don't know, the FERC always listens to state input?
It doesn't fiat that like we literally always listen to state input.
Not every
wait, let me clarify. We listen to state input. It doesn't always fiat that we follow like all state input.
But if you ought to be clear, if you ought to Florida engagement, you have to listen to environmental protections, things like water standards, etc.
Wait, so it fiat's the floor of state protection? Is that what you just said?
Yes. So they'll listen to the states at a floor level.
How is that?
But not literally every extraneous state claim does.
How is that different from what exists right now? The Clean Water Act sets a floor for water protection that applies to all of the states.
States don't listen.
No, because it's a different floor. The Clean Water Act doesn't apply in many parts of pipelines. We've read a bunch of evidence about, say, California specifically, and about California concerns about pipeline safety, leakage, methane leakage, etc.
All right. So as I understand it, the federal government creates a system where the states can provide input as to how to regulate pipelines and the such, and the federal government, or I don't know, the FERC or the DOD or DOJ, no, DOD chooses to listen to specific types of that input. Is that an accurate characterization?
Yes, but it has to listen to at least some of the water protection reports.
So it has to listen to some of them?
Yes, because that's what the balancing part of the plan means. There is a floor for listening. They have to accept recommendations, but they don't have to accept literally all of them. There's a floor for engagement, but they don't have to accept literally every state.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out what the floor is. What is the floor for that recommendation? What floor do you set?
We think that would be into its like water quality concerns, most likely.
Hey, what water quality concern?
States have standards for water quality. States have standards for water quality
that
concerns.
Go above.
That would be like what's implemented. We've read a bunch of evidence about state water quality concerns, including things like methane leakage for pipelines.
Okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say California wants to implement stringent water quality standards. Texas does not. They both issue recommendations to the federal government. What happens?
Is this a pipeline that goes through both? Or? Because the federal government
would implement
water quality standards. Why can't different states issue different floors? How does the federal government?
Well, the pipeline just goes through California. They listen to California. If it goes through Texas, it goes through Texas. Listen, Texas.
So it's every single pipeline has to get approval from the federal government.
That's already.
Every single pipe. Okay, which agency does this go through?
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
This is already the case. Like this was the premise of the F.
Let's talk about. Okay, so that's kind of interesting because on the politics link, you read a card saying that states don't like it would be unpopular in states to implement this policy. So why would states issue these recommendations? Yeah, you read a card saying that it's unpopular in states, local opposition prevents it.
No,
that's like NIMBYs don't want like unregulated pipelines.
Yeah, they
want state governments to mediate. It's not like people like. It's not what you're saying it is.
Yeah.
I clearly don't understand it, as you probably can tell. All right, we'll take prep. We have 10 minutes. Let me go. Okay, starting now. We stop. Oh, never mind. Never mind. All right, we stopped at 5:50 left. I feel something at it. Wait, actually, we'll resume prep for a sec. Wait, let's see, 5:50. I'm just gonna ask about theory starting now. So I got condo, neg fiat bad. What else?
Let me see.
I know there was devolution counterplans. There was topical counterplans. Rick, were there anything else?
Counterplans,
What?
state counterplans.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Okay, stop 525.
Okay, is everyone good for an order? The 2NC should have been sent. Okay, the order is T-ITS, the state's counterplan, advantage 1, advantage 2. Okay, does anyone need that again or has not received the document? Okay, if anyone, okay, yeah, I'll wait. Okay, if anyone's not ready, just stop me in the next couple of seconds. Topical last was increase federal protection of water resources. There's 2 violations. 1, protection means the establishment of public trust, which excludes transferring authority. That's mood. 2, it means protection by the federal government, not city control. That's brand. And the boss. 2C1 was we made because they protect from adverse impacts. Now, the plan text could theoretically result in protection, but it does not fiat protection. And there's a scenario in which no protection occurs. Look, the AF creates a venue for protection. It includes the state's consultation through the permitting process, but there is a world in which the states do not recommend any environmental regulations. They just permit a federal LNG project on face, which means they do not necessarily have to fiat a scenario in which any new regulation of environmental pollution actually occurs. There's a scenario in which there's no increase in protection from adverse impacts on LNG projects. Now, Tracy 2 was that we meet the 8th violation. 1, the plan quote mandates quote a balance of state interests, and 1 is the cross and 2 is the cross examination. They defended that the plan defends at least some implementation of at least 1 state recommendation when it comes to environmental pollution, which violates all of our interpretations, because it says that the federal government cannot include the state government when it comes to the creation or imposition of any of the environmental regulations under T-ITS and protection. 2, enforcement does not matter. They still increase state authority, which is the violation we've gone for. They've considered the Brent and Bosch evidence, which says that it prevents the transfer of authority, which is what the affirmative does. 3 is they do transfer authority, which violates Moon as well. And 3C3 was that we meet protection that was answered above. Now, they did not respond to any of our offense. Think about how bad their model of debate is. It destroys ground because it did not a role for the negative by only topic generics like incentive guidance, devolution, and privatization canvas, or BizCon says, because they can just say that non-governmental actors shield the link, and they explode limits because they could delegate to infinite private actors, states, private companies, NGOs, or tribes. All of their we meet extrapolations are also effects topical, because the plan still includes state consultation, and they only meet by the effect of the federal government implementing the regulation, which links to all of our offense because it justifies bidirectionality, because affirmatives could decrease federal protection but make state filling claims, which destroys the topics. 2 ways reach the margins to skirt generics, which a system hospital standard for negative research and makes that prep untenable. Now that they do not get any new responses, the entirety of it was the exact same explanation of the T and the 1 and C now states the counterplan also see affirmative United States greenlight expanded LNG production, clarify regulations, and invest substantially in federal state cooperation over green technology. That's Nolan. Look, you should frame it through 1AC cross examination. The entire affirmative is states are vetoing LNG projects now, and that's bad. The easiest solution is to just stop states from vetoing projects, which is what the counterplan does. It's the first sufficiency and high risk of net benefit always an uncomfortable policy deficit. Judge the counterplan of its first status quo. It's illogical to do otherwise. It's an extension of the condo 2C1 permutation to both links to net benefit, because it either forces voters to have political capital to confirm zone, or it gives Republicans the ability to attach a poison pill. Permutation to the counterplan was 2AC2. It severs the federal government, which is a voting issue for this, and clash 2AC3 permutation and any plank links to net benefit benefit that was above 2C. Before it does not was linked to the net benefit. No, it does not, because it does not include federal action. The taxes the taxes plan does not implicate bad SPC or the poison pill negotiations. 2C5 state 2C5 was states have other ways to strike down. That was their only deficit one. The counterpart solves it substantially reduces with fiat that the states substantially reduce the reduction of projects, which is what their internal link is about. Want to see class and Rossi 16th year religious rejection allowed in all inefficient topic. State regulators to find 11th hour state feedback just as CW procedures can produce efficient procedures and course of FRC decisions. 2. The counterpart announces a clear regulatory framework for when states will exercise section 4.1 authority. Want to see Duncan and Ellis 1964 certification is a jerk because time plus delay and project evaluation was state agencies taking a liberal view. 2. The affirmative does not solve. Their card is about another piece of legislation and about ocean pipelines. The CWA only regulates LNG the construction ports, to not pipelines that go into the middle of the Pacific Ocean. 3. They do not have the deficit is not impacted out. They have not isolated specific states that use this legislation or specific states that will use the legislation to block pipelines post a Catalan, which is a threshold they need to win any effect of the deficit. 4. If they're right, you can just modify the first link of the Catalan to just substantially reduce the rejection of LNG the projects and remove the section 4.1 clarification. 2C5 was the 2C5 was that we reduce state influence over FERC. Does not matter. The uniqueness claim is that FERC is good and that states are bad. The only impediment is the states, which the Catalan removes, which align states with the federal government. The next, they say local opposition, fiat solves. They say interstate discrepancies, uniformity solves. They say we do not solve cooperative federalism. 1. We funded substantially in research and development of CCS and green technology, which was a job playing. 2. We fiat federal cooperation, which is better than the affirmative convoluted spillover claim. 3 is that we fiat that we fix leaks in current technology, which results in emissions. 4 is that we fiat a mandate in emissions reduction, which results in state innovation. 5 is that we have the states align with the federal government. We have the states say that yes, the FRC is right. We should not be blocking projects any longer, which should be sufficient. A card is not about LNG or federal action. I want to see a class of Rossi 16 wants to maximize the points. Maximize states' ability to control adventure, predicting it comes at high cost of cost tax until they reduce federalism, complex states, and project proposals themselves could better facilitate legislative communication if they were practically engaged state local impacts of and evaluations of pipelines. Cut the card at pipelines now we do mandate emissions does solve that was the innovation stuff above. Now business certainty, uniformity this solves, and it's a reversal from the states, which was the major impediment which solves. Now 50 state the fiat we get uniformity, ace but is real world state a complex reform or prevalent to be split as diagram back together states can't absolve affirmative from adjusting core controversy. C split is functional limits is key to test the affirmative keyword. D split is lit based states free is federal is a core controversy. Now defense is not a civil bullet because federal keywords do exist and hard debate. It's good debate multiplying capitalize without exclusive policy advocacy is good. It fosters better education and critical thinking, and it's critical to negative ground. And there's always after keywords. Now the LNG advantage one is perceived as environmental regulations. It incorporates a state interest in the federal certification process. The entire affirmative was that states are bad. They're trying to impose stringent environmental regulations, which means that the vast majority of LNG projects would either be extremely hampered, which destroys investor confidence, or they would just be blocked outright because they just give states complete authority over how to regulate the LNG projects in the future, which definitely is not conducive to long-term business certainty. 2, there's no Brink claim. Sure, they could be right that there's slight declines in LNG production, but no piece of evidence quantifies a complete collapse of it, which is what their internal evidence is about. Now the Russia scenario 1, the affirmative does not solve. In time Ukraine is being financed this year. LNG projects the approval process takes years and decades, which means they cannot solve. 2, EU dependence on Russian oil and natural gas is declining. Cancellation of Nord Stream 2. Sanctions proved. 3, there's no Ukraine escalation. It's stopped for the last couple of weeks. There's been a flurry of sanctions. Ukraine beating Russia at Kiev, which should have all triggered Russia's red lines, but they did not. 4, there's no the war. Keep on 19. I get something on nuclear war by being looking at historical evidence. Abuse of express protection by broadcasters. If we get perspective, like just the nuclear war between US and Russia around 0.3 the percent hotline CVMs and empirics all this should solve. Now the China scenario, there's multiple all causes. Their internal link is about economic interdependence, which is thumbed by Trump first of all, but there's also other forms of economic interdependence, like China being our largest trade partner too. Is that the impact is about East Asian expansion. Obviously, natural gas does not matter when it comes to Chinese sacred commitments. So 4 is that there's no deterrence check, saying the 19 explaining what I should across the states. I'm sure backlash equals military retaliation and unless U.S. official Chinese assess the war, but U.S. shifts to both class for after the internal reports and interviews. Cut the card at interviews. Now the federalism advantage. It's just a Frankenstein deficit to state energy and environmental investment is high now. California climate treaties dozens have invested in clean tech. The internal link is from 15 years ago. It says that states are already making a fuel economy improvements, climates, renewables. There's no legal barrier preventing state and federal cooperation right now, which means there's no the real concrete explanation for how the affirmative facilitates cooperation in the future. 2 is that there's no the spillover if they're right about the uniqueness claim. There's no warming impact risk scenarios are unlikely to funny yes, this is made with best to not believe will be or how does it possible but less extinction which will be less carbon intensive reduce climate mortality by 5, which also responds to their climate change escalation scenario.
Okay. Are you good for cross?
Yeah.
Okay. First, I want to ask about at the top of the violation. You talked about how like it's theoretically possible that no state like submits recommendations to the USFG. So I guess first question: we've read evidence that you've conceded that at least one state has recommendations they'd like to give to FERC. Why is that not sufficient?
There's a scenario in which, like, the affirmative does not fiat that the state submits those environmental recommendations. The mandate of the affirmative is only listen to the states.
Okay,
Which
sure.
means
Second
that
question.
even
Second
if
question.
you're right about your effects T explanation, there's a
WOTUS Act,
scenario in which you are not effects T.
WOTUS Act expands the definition of waters of the United States, which stops polluters from polluting. Isn't there theoretically a scenario where every polluter just packs up their bags during the plan and there's zero enforcement under expanded definition?
The difference
of WOTUS?
is that under the WOTUS Act, there's a mandate from the affirmative that changes the definition of WOTUS. The mandate of this affirmative
There's a
does not
mandate
require any environmental
There's a mandate that
regulations.
changes the definition of WOTUS, but there's not a mandate to enforce that if no one violates it, right?
There's a mandate to change the agency definition of WOTUS, which is the biggest environmental regulation that the EPA and any
Okay,
other environmental
sure.
body at the federal
Let's
level
talk
enforces. The affirmative does not enforce
Let's
any
talk about the
environmental
states.
regulation. It's just let's listen to the states.
Let's talk about the state's counterplan for a minute. You amended the stop vetoing plan to include the Deepwater Protection Act, etc.
I said that if you are right about your deficit and you meet the threshold for an impact of this deficit, we will amend the counterplan. We will
Wait,
the
the
first
2NR
plank of
will
the
amend the
counterplan is
counterplan?
amended.
The 2NR will amend the counterplan?
Look, if you are right about the impact of the deficit and we decide that look, the deficit is legitimate, we can maybe
Are you amending it in the 2NC or not? I understand you might amend the 2NR. Are you amending in the 2NC?
Sure, we'll amend it in the 2NC. But
Okay.
we don't need to necessarily win that claim because we've made other defensive arguments to the deficit.
Okay, sure. I guess you said that you fiat through local opposition. Do you fiat away NIMBY protesters?
No, we fiat that the state governments enforce it despite opposition.
Well, I understand that, but if protesters do what they do, we have evidence that they physically bought pipelines, they get pipeline companies to shut them down.
States send local enforcement agencies to disband the protesters.
Wait, hold on. What plank of the counterplan says that? You say the states don't use vetoes. Where does it say they forcibly make the pipelines go through?
The second plank durably fiats the clarification and creation of clear regulations when it comes to LNG, which encompasses
regulations doesn't mean they're going to kill protesters to get the pipelines, dude. That's
no. It means that they durably fiat the counterplan if the counterplan includes the permitting of.
You think establishing regulations means that they will?
Yes, the enforcement of regulations. That state enforcement agencies enforce the regulations. The same problem arises with the affirmative. Are you kidding? There's going to be local opposition to the affirmative. What, do you send the FBI to go kill protesters? If so, that links to the politics.
We read a specific link to your counterplan, but that's cross.
What, you've read a link about local opposition? Local opposition exists in the world of the affirmative.
This is for the 1AR. We can't tell you now.
I'm sending out the 1AR. The 1AR was sent, by the way. I'll give an order when I connect on that. Okay, did everyone receive it? Oh, okay. I did not expect that. All right, awesome. If anyone's not ready, just let me know. Begin in 10 seconds. Give you time to unmute. What's the order?
Did you say what the order was?
Oh, my bad. Devolve counterplan. Advantage counterplan. Security K. Title 42 DSAD. And then the SOAN DSAD. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to take like 5 seconds of prep starting. All right, 20 seconds used. Nothing's different. Let me just update the prep in the chat. Right. So I assume we're all still ready. Does anyone need the order again? Okay, great. So starting on devolved counterplan. Okay. Concede the protest combination, rather argument on the team, the advantage but concede the protest combination count is good. We go we did a critical thinking force. Let's reduce the information piece was neck agile class on a CM top with 0 to ground left for rigorous testing which first better actually agile actually see split is absolutely test for arguments from the different viewpoints, but actually show about the pulse maker reject the argument analysis person to see choice. I check a beat to see and triple this book she conference the first we see permutation sure go the game best is arbitrary and unpredictable because there's no consensus what it even means that we see did not even define it. The 1 year does not get you neck fiat is good for all the reasons above. And the topical counterparts are good, but any counterpart that is competitive with the plan is topical. 1 logic of competitive they should have to answer it. 2 opportunity cost. 3 doesn't apply to them. They read a specific plan. 4 neg flex topic is huge classified that from above. 5 the counterpart is topical. It's actually if the counterpart is not topical, it's extra cheating multiplexes are good. We don't take more than 1, which means it's just 1 extra condo. And 2 and C counterpart amendments are good. They were super big in cross-sex. They only defended what they did when we went for T. A split is neg flex that 2 the counterparts the app can literally save any advantage of the 2 C also reciprocal if they get to win into the 2 C clarify internal into the app and read analysts beat a counterpart out of them. Beats 1 real world new plans to making policies better. C split defense if it's a constructive they get cross-sex time on 1 year cards. The topic is super out by so air neg on theory the security case the concede the perm tech which can test competition with the argument not the team negation theory answers per plan the top of 40 said nothing the cross global except plan popular answer on the sun decide go there now some information locks in neutrality solves the digital door terrorism otherwise info war firmly cyber taxing catastrophic AI weapons integration nuclear miscalculation and extinction that's man said my decision to extend it just as predicate on the fact that Twisi conceded the net neutrality impact solves extinction via global info wars they chose not to answer which means the 1 year does not get you that means you are winning a full on nuclear war which causes extinction outweighs in terms of the app the biggest net neutrality on global innovation and solves warming serpent and then 20 we discover with this active acceptance health education the dividend impact actually strike this card strike this card it turns China war being the 19 tech escalated from an animosity division. The box become its winter all countries because China mismanaged and war will ensue or proxy wars and war will suppress war as well. US and China the entire world. Treaty 1 so gets confirmed now. The evidence is not saying she won't get confirmed just as they face higher hard margins. Biden this pressuring Manchin, Tasker, Kelly, and Sinema took over. So now they're all willing to swing, but it will be close because they're worried about re-election. Don't want to appear the 2 partisan. That's Cole Biden's expanding political capital to the persuade monitors handle for 18 key senators. The receiving pressure Manchin has said if it's the work could do the value for his master of it. Some of the test for water, but it took my preference for whatever committee Democrats White House after the engagement. Senators make also yes, someone has been started worse. She'll speak by so IR 3 31 some local to start off the representative someone we want to confirm this strength with GB nobody probably Democrat have considered someone to break the deadlock to kind of controversial and that's enough. The support is in 331 jumps to get data confirmation someone you need human support the mention and demonstrated with us man and master but no Horace Hassan and Kelly did comment there's considered but becoming more difficult and them Michael Dan Marshall support going to question there are no Horace is vote next week their votes are there shields only to try to advance the approval of Senator the plus the control of the first orange side that them could the first vote she'll be confirming it in 3 that's 20 under pressure to the pushes to the FC deadlock deny leaders majorities into the best parties all 50 them be present she'll be approved hard and see in 270 so that's the we've her to be approved by slow march and tweets if you winners don't win it's wrong depends on whether the policy wins are popular whistle plan isn't winners this is not true today so problem at all 37 that little moment Robana to feature wins the ideal will be a win because it's not too much if you would question about his body possible to patch as bring more to far from it really cut his power time doesn't say anything for Biden's PC staff at constant the 4th week but momentum and again about whether we're the possible to the majority major election the cover 2 tests to be responsive by mentioned that the Biden has to gun and border messages if you prove the midterm and of winners 263 I'll answer the link here they say pipelines they don't fiat approving pipelines they fiat listening to the states which is the opposite does not assume Biden has been strategically expanding PC with key monitors to eliminate dem defections for Stone. It hinges on good faith negotiations and nonpartisanship. The plan is Biden barging into Congress and forcing them to vote on controversial legislation to listen to any state environmental protection that angers moderate Dems who will vote against on to distance themselves from liberals before midterms. There's a low link threshold established by Uniqueness controls the direction of blink. They want to spin themselves as an energy policy that makes it easier to export LNG, but the immediate perception of the plan is an environmental deregulation which was all in cross-sex. They impose a federal environmental regulatory framework that states would choose what policy is to implement as perceived as Biden protecting liberal states like California and their emissions reduction schemes. 1 signaling class and 7 reconning Congress that supports the federal energy standing practice of the Indian Energy Policy Act. 2 state environmental policies bill 21 was represented preempted by for energy promoting environmental priorities. Here's arguments originated on to environmental collection. 3 CWA Walton 50 over water costs of federal reason not in CWA through process no comment about there is 5% agreement there's no compromise. 4 comment legislation confidence of 30 some of lobbies legislation for the PL also push a generation the consumer test was already the lobby so lobbies the Democrats to do the fossil fuels and paradigm infrastructure. Tweety 4 fiat doesn't solve one, can't fiat a reality. The specific links prove the plan has political backlash, but the immediacy is a new link because it proves that the plan is a bolt from the blue to internally aggressive. 3 politics are good for research forces, in-depth research, current events, and B key to checks mods or not. Tweety 5 doesn't compartmentalize. No, Tweety the warrant and Tweety 6 mention is key. He will pass it. Wuhan is also returned. The debauches is through relief percent of the Senate for you to make sure to show up. Tweety 7 PC is not the one. Biden believes it's Tweety 11. This is the total cover the Biden stats given the Congress possibility. This and we will have enough of reminding America will represent another power platform to lower action results to their other links, congressional divisions and delays. It's not just about the political capital, but Biden is focusing on the home stretch, pitching to be the 22 surface, the Rocky battle place, initially because of rifle Senate, sounds like so the Biden can do it for the fill the vacancy. 288 says zone is key. They skipped it, but we'll extend the interlink zone unless a broad internet agenda because she's the third one to unlock the FCC deadlock, but current net neutrality fails because it does not assume net neutrality and global headwinds for a global internet balkanization, which their evidence doesn't account for. And the Mansion stuff, all the uniqueness response to it, so you can cross-apply it.
Cool. We have 7:25. I'll start it now. Stop rep. We have 418 remaining. I got one card. Cool. It's been sent. I'll give it order if people got it. People gotten it? Sweet. Order will be advantage 1, advantage
Pretty
2.
clear. I'm still opening it.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah. Okay, I'm good for orders. Sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, for sure. Advantage 1, advantage 2, T, the state's counter plan, the 7DA. Cool. People go in order. People go for the order. Cool. It looks like everyone's good, and no one's out. I'm about to get started. Cool. LNG advantage, a flat drop in the EU scenario. LNG to heat to stop energy price fracturing. EU solves the litany of external threats to stop power projection. No new response in the scenario because it goes flat drop out of 2AC, outweighs the disadvantage, results in actual authoritarian Wisconsin internet bulk condition as per China, which means that we access their impact, but they don't access ours. They say the state's bad, so we can't solve. They have conceded the 1AC huge evidence that there are 50 pipelines that are already done, but are currently not being used because the vetoes that block use. They said plan solved, but they rescind the vetoes once they're involved in the process, means that we immediately increase production. That's the thesis of the F. We require FERC to listen to make pipelines and make environmentally sound decisions because the only way the pipelines go through, which means that we dramatically increase short-term natural gas production when answers all the immediacy boards that they go for in the 2NC. They see there's no brain claim. Yes, our evidence says that there's structural collapse in this quote, but our evidence about the Ukraine scenario said that it's unique right now because it's resident of whether Putin feels emboldened Russia in the area, which results in increased expedition to the Balkans. The China scenario, Gromper, diverse causal hotspot that's going to go nuclear now from mismatch perception that we're sticking in the SES. China doesn't think US will use weapons. US thinks they have to use weapons to deter China, which results in escalation. However, that is not true in the world of the plan because China was incentivized to cooperate with their private energy suppliers, so they won't do expansion activity. It's not about economic independence, which all the spin, but rather energy independence, i.e. in a world of energy independence, China will not be willing to go to war with the US because they rely on us for their energy sources and their people not have the ability to fuel themselves. Deterrence does not check. Czechoslovakia assumes it includes that China does not think deterrence is credible in the SES specifically because they don't think the US has political will to defend it. Economic don't apply because their evidence said that they're still willing to do risk taking, etc. The Ukraine scenario, it's up the top. We're extending the first Russian impact, not the second one. It's the short-term scenario. Putin winning in Ukraine results in attempted nationalist power seizure in the Baltics because he bases foreign policy off of oil prices proven by Ukraine and Georgia, which results in NATO drawn in war. Hooker reverse causal saying that cutting off gas prices solves the just question of the US being able to crash oil in the process. They say no escalation. Their evidence from years ago, bad news about Putin in recent years. However, our evidence says that he's equally like it, that even if he doesn't think he could beat the US in a war, he thinks they could invade areas like the Baltics if he sees some other success in Ukraine, which means that the key to cut off the war machine through ruling oil prices because the vehicle he uses to fuel the conflict in the first place. The T violation. We've explained that there is a floor for engagement in the world of the plan. They listen to states for stringent water quality standards. They can listen to more if they want to, but they are required to listen to the standards that the states have already set out for the 1AC class and Rossi evidence, which is a floor for engagement and prove that we have a minimum for water quality standards. States do not do their protecting fed or takes out the station stuff because the federal government is the only body regulating the conflict of use, which is the 1NC protect violation they've gone for. They say that the 1NC interpretation was moon. They didn't read moon. They read zircon. So I'm not sure what they get here. It probably means they extended the wrong key violation. But in the plan passes world, there's a 100% chance that every pipeline has to meet state environmental water standards and a 100% chance that the Fed is the only agency enforcing it. They see the world where no X pass can see that there's already regs that states are applying. The federal government would say yes to post plan, which means that there's no risk of nothing occurring. They say we don't increase state authority. They say we increase state authority. No, we don't. That was all explained above because they do not enforce anything. There is no legal expansion, but rather the federal government is taking them into account. But the federal government does the enforcing preferred regulations. They say affects T, not affects every app. It has some effect topical methods by implementing a regulation that then protects water, but there's already state standards that we're close to the directly topical you can get. The states got to one at the top permutation to both shields because it's no longer a controversial issue. All 50 states agree on this issue. Did not respond to the articulation of the 2NC meeting. They don't get to in the 1AR. Sufficient statement is bad. Proven by the size of the F impact and don't judge the 2A debate 2 world. There's just logical and the storage preparation makes impossible. The affirmative reject 2NC counterplan planks makes the counterplan a moving target and impossible get deficits. They still get plenty of negative flexibility because we gave them all the other theory violations, which means that you should direct the team for deterrence on this issue on the deficits. First, states presenting CWA vetoes doesn't solve external methods of blocking pipelines like DWPA, leasing, and infrastructure approval, which is the crop evidence. Absolutely, because there's no incentive to do these things in the world of the plan. They need the counterplan results in litigation, which hampers investment in the future. Even if states say yes, long-term massive uncertainty among investors because there's still these other pipelines and states are expressed approval towards pipeline production, mean that there's no certainty without it quantify short-term impact because our evidence is premised on the idea that the states are actively so confident in the U.S. that they're in the U.S. federal government that they're willing to rescind their vetoes on the 50 pipelines that have already been created for the Hughes evidence, which is not likely in a world of the counterplan because their federal government is still not taking state interest into account, which has not been responded to. They say the plank so it doesn't solve, but the plank just says don't use vetoes, doesn't solve because the evidence isn't just vetoes, it's about legal mechanisms review that slowed down the process was linked to an impact that are short term. The second deficit is Zimmerman Zimbies will block pipelines if state interests are considered because pipelines pollute neighborhoods, results in unsafe pipelines, hamper productivity and uncertainty. They just said fiat solves. Do not give them anything beyond fiat solves in the 2NR. Come on, they couldn't pull this deficit off. Links to all the magnification off at the above because even if the counterplan fiats that they don't use the vetoes, the pipelines do not go through it. The people hate the current pipelines because they result in environmental pollution writ large. Does not lead to the app they say for cross-examination because our evidence said that they didn't be specifically block pipelines that pollute local environments, which is not true for the world of the plan because they consider state environmental interests to mean that the pipelines don't get blocked, do not get them new technology. That's it. In the next speech on the disadvantage, turnkey relies on winning the entire disadvantage and only assumes one Syria will win that our impacts that way because they concede the European stuff. On the uniqueness debate, Sohn fails most well into the politics starting the round. Handel evidence concludes that Republicans, moderates, and telecoms are all blocking nomination because they frame Sohn's past statements anti-police, which moderates like Manchin, etc., don't want to be on board of. It's the conclusive and determinant the bills that they're unlikely to get through. Their only card they read that's recent is their own cutting the Handel evidence. Said Manchin's undecided, does not say bill passes. Every other card they read is from over a month ago, is not predictive of the status quo population. You default to the more recent evidence. On the link page, they're framing this that you should frame the link to the fact that they have conceded that in the world of the plan, 50 pipelines immediately come online. Takes out their stuff about signaling how we perceive the environmental regulations because Manchin loves it. Our fact, who is the evidence says that Manchin is livid right now because FERC is blocking these specific pipelines. Aronoff says Democrats and Republicans love the plan. Democrats want Manchin. Democrats like want LNG to lower gas prices. Republicans about it. I think that there's broad bipartisanship, and they dropped the other DA that energy production is popular. The Harper evidence on the Title 42 DA says that 77% want more drilling. Means everyone loves it.
Okay, 5:05. 1 second, timer. Okay, starting now.
Okay, that's time. The order is the dissent, zone dissent, state's counterplan, and then the first advantage. Okay, is anyone not ready? Okay, if anyone is not ready, just stop for the next couple of seconds. Global internet balkanization is a truly external impact that triggers authoritarian InfoWars is faster than the affirmative. The perception of internet collapse triggers extinction via a catastrophic weapons proliferation. AI, WMT, that's an equality that depends on states boosting LNG, which takes time. It's also a larger, only artificial intelligence causes extinction via catastrophic WMT usage. Authoritarian InfoWars turns the affirmative. It destabilizes the European Union by fueling Russian revisionism. It turns warming. Nuclear war destroys the environment, makes warming mitigation impossible. Now, uniqueness. The 1A are just grandstanded about their evidence of being predictive, even though it's not. Point me to a line in your RFD that says that a zone will not be confirmed now. We are outcutting them a 10-1 on uniqueness. None of their evidence assumes bias PC, which is a framing issue for the entirety of the dissent, which was a conceded theory. They've conceded that PC is true, PC is working, and PC is key. He's exerting it to get them on board. That's Hendel. Yes, she is anti-police, but Dems are willing to let that fly. That's one in our hearts. And Phillips, couple of warrants. One, key moderates, Tester, Cinema, Manchin are going to get on board now. That's Hendel. Even if Manchin is undecided, they've considered that the theory of PC means that Manchin gets on board in the future, but the affirmative disrupts that. 2, inside report. Zone will speak by now, which is IR, which is from 331. 3, Dems are likely to vote for. That's Phillips. 4, the Shields evidence says, quote, the votes are there on Zone's side. 5, Senate Commerce Committee, they're bipartisan and they expect so to get confirmed this Harsty. Our evidence is from the past month and it's predictive. Unlike theirs, they've considered a Zone unlocks net neutrality, and that's all extinction. Now, the link debate, do not frame it through this 50 pipeline stuff. They're framing issues. They've dropped that the PC is true and there's a low link threshold, which means there's a high risk that the plan will cause damn defections. They've dropped the immediacy link. The plan is the bolt from the blue action that distracts bias PC and causes them to reprioritize, which prevents them from investing PC. And so they've also dropped the empirics of congressional division. So the climate link, the plan is spawned by Republicans as the wolf in sheep's clothing. Dem say it's pipelines, but it's seen as a liberal disguise to uphold all of California's emissions reductions and every liberal state's environmental policy, which is a recut of their own card that the 1 year dropped and is definitely spun to Manchin, and it applies sufficient public pressure that Manchin flips. Now they say the plan approves now no new to air responses. They say that energy production is popular. They've considered the spin, which truly turns which turns all public sentiment against energy production. And they do not have a card in the context of the affirmative. Lujan is on the Dem sides now, which means that they can afford some defections, but not moderates like Manchin. Now the state's counterplan, the counterplan is the most unambiguous signal of support for LNG exports. Frame it through frame all their certainty related deficits through relative signals. The affirmative is a convoluted, ambiguous incorporation of states' interest in the federal government. At this point in the debate, you do not know what the affirmative does. Investors do not know the extent of state influence, what environmentally restrictive regulations states impose, whether the FERC will allow states to shut down LNG in the world of the affirmative. But in the world of the counterplan, there's a clear-cut directive from the states that we're to stop vetoing pipelines, which is the biggest and most clear signal that investors need to start expanding LNG. Now they see permutation about Shields. They've considered that it includes the federal action, and any inclusion of it taps Biden's the PC because it forces the Biden to at least negotiate with Manchin and stuff. And any inclusion, any risk of the permutation links to net benefit means you should prefer the counterplan alone. They say Judge Kate is the two are impossible. They've considered that it's an extension of condo and negative flux, etc. Outweigh now the 2NC counterplan amendment stuff. They've considered that it's good for negative flux and key to solve the vagueness and that it's real world, all of which are standards. And we did the impact calculus. They do not have to reinvent the wheel. It does not make AFCON impossible. They've considered that the topic is not biased anyways, and they've considered that so the 2NC is a constructive of the 1 areas. New responses. They also dropped a vagueness. They redefine the plan, which is why we went for the T as a floor. Now they say states result in litigation. 1, late vetoes. We fiat an end to 11th hour rejections, which is critical to solve certainty. That's called 1AC Classy and Rossi. 2, clear regulatory framework. Drop the second plank, which has the states create a uniform, unambiguous regulatory framework. That's Duncan and Ellis evidence that it does solve certainty. States have final say in the entirety of LNG projects, which is the entire uniqueness of the first advantage. They say the federal government does not include state interests. It does not matter. Investors do not care about a convoluted legal process between the states and federal government. The bottom line that they care about is the states fucking them over now. The second plank solves long-term clarification by creating a permanent regulatory framework. They say the Zimmerman deficit state regulations and productivity, and they've considered the second plank to create regulations which ensures that LNG is regulated and there's no justification for protest. Plus, they've considered the combination of all of the warming planks like emissions mandates, CCS, stopping leaks on plants, which means the CAPLAN is perceived as environmentally friendly for these protesters, and fiat ensures the affirmative. Fiat ensures the CAPLAN is enforced, and there's no impact of this deficit about the protests, and they did not make a link to net benefit explanation, so they did not get one in the next speech. Now, the first and finished the EU scenario, they've considered that EU is no longer dependent on Russian oil and natural gas because of Nord Stream 2 and sanctions, all of which means that this is totally not unique. They've also considered that now the Russia war scenario, they say a short-term Russia war in Ukraine, all of our 2NC warrants apply because it's about no nuclear escalation, which they've dropped. The Rodriguez evidence is best. It aggregates all studies and says
there's a starting risk of 0.3% because hotlines Assault and sanctions Kiev all dropped in the last speech. Now China war, there's structural military deterrence solves conceded the Zhang evidence, which says that even if they're right about their energy dependent stuff and Russia and China, there's an increased incentive for China to get to war in Taiwan. Military allies deter, and Lei says that there's other form of economic independence, sanctions, aversion to war, no ideological confrontation are all warrants why China will not get involved in the first place. Every warrant for why energy independence is key applies to economic interdependence, and their internal link in the what I see is about economic interdependence, so all of the defense applies.
All right, we have 14. I'll start it now.
Oh, okay, muted. Okay. It's going to be Advantage 1, then the state's counter plan, then the DA. Is everyone ready? Yeah. All right. At the top, they dropped the EU scenario in bloc that is strengthening to an architecturalization for free flow. EU clashes down into massive Russian oil leverages foreign states pick a side between cohesion and Russian energy means that it fashions global democratic soft power and prevents cooperation on threats and balkanizes the resurgence of authoritarian leaders. The only response to the EU is not dependent. It wasn't dropped. EU still buys $30 billion to save Russia each month, and especially with authoritarian nation will fracture due to this Russian oil dependency. They say Nord Stream 2 never started, so it can't possibly solve us. The EU, they dropped the EU explicitly exempted billions of dollars in Russian gas and oil from their sanctions. They're still dependent on it, which is proven by things like Hungary. It solves the DA collapse of soft power. Obviously means a resurgent authoritarian leaders can forcibly balkanize and it triggers their impact faster because the corrosion and neutrality causing balkanization has been happening for 4 years now with minimal effect, but authoritarians using the government that can happen almost immediately, which means we happen faster and turn their impact. Second is Russia war. That way it's only evidence that potates the Ukraine invasion. Russia will be able to escalate now because they get victories in Ukraine because of massive oil revenues, which refill the war chest and resupply troops. They say they're losing now, doesn't assume they want to Mariupol, but at best it's unclear as to whether Russia's going to win now, which means we have to cut out their oil revenues because if they get winning, they'll see NATO intervention in Neville and do escalating gray zones like the Russian enclave of Narva, which triggers NATO intervention in Article 5, it goes nuclear. They said their evidence says no Russian-US confrontation doesn't improve involvement post-Ukraine victories from oil crisis, the Brooklyn Baltic interventions that draw into a unique scenario for indirect drawing that they missed the boat. And also their evidence is definitely cites agreements and hotlines that Russia has literally explicitly disavowed after the Ukraine invasion, which means it's just not recent enough. State's counter plan. Per Dubov, it said permutation Dubov, Switzerland, and benefit. That should resolve most of the lowest threshold no lane, and low threshold no lane because states their only articulation was that Biden still has to negotiate with Google. Yes, Biden may have to negotiate a little bit, but still solved most of them. They conceded that states doing it, all 50 states doing it means it's extremely popular and takes all their link warrants for like Republicans and conservative states not liking it. Extended one-year articulation permutation solves the play would no longer be proceeded parts in 50 states acting unity means not political devices. The only don't do the work for them. Blue solve two strategies. Don't justify stopping to an debate. And the Cal plan doesn't solve the AF. The only thing we need to win is the Zimmerman deficits. Hyper-specific to the AF is that when the feds do not take interest into account, there's an empirical record of NIMBYs and other environmentalists physically blockading and forcing pipeline companies to cancel projects or downside them entirely. It literally says that projects get canceled, allowing the states to advocate their federalism interest in pipelines that FERC goes unimpeded. You can see the results of things like $40 billion in pollution, as per the Zimmerman evidence, which obviously spurs massive opposition. The only response you give the 2 and R is that quote Fiat solves. Every single 2NC deficit was that, and I shouldn't have to respond to it. Our strike was predicated off of 1 year mistakes. Fiat does not solve. There's nothing in the plan of forcibly breaking up portals. It just says that states create regulatory system and stop vetoes. Think about the analogy with the Fed. The Fed has a pipeline process and rules regulating but blocking pipelines, but the enforcement of those rules have like the CIA breaking up protests when they block pipelines. Secondly, they've card zero that state governments actually can stop the protests. Rumor state police being totally integrated in fact to break up some riots and stuff and not being willing to enforce against protesters. They say Fiat ensures it's enforced. Again, no, it's not. There's no point in the Commonwealth says it's enforced. Creating a regulatory scheme does not include like physically breaking up protesters. And they can see that empirically in the past, when states have had laws against this kind of protesting, protesters have still forced oil and gas companies to downsize projects and stop them. And it's magnified by uncertainty. It's certain the asphalt's 50 pipelines because they've dropped it. It's uncertain that NIMBYs might force companies to downsize. That means there's zero risk of it. There's no risk of investing in the future because investors are concerned that state regulatory schemes resolve protest or blockages. Don't give them any of these new arguments anyways. All their arguments in the block window, they only get like Fiat solves, which they didn't really stand that well. Yeah. Link, frame this debate the link though. 2 rounds for a lot of time established. You need to restore 30 seconds of link though. It's not enough to win against an oil good aft. That matters. The scope of the affirmative impact law of the impact turns case means that we shouldn't have to win. Must arrange to no link here. It's impossible for them to win the plan as a precedent environmental regulation when they concede in the world the plan states immediately lift the veto on LNG production that's articulated in the Who's evidence. That means 50 pipelines immediately come online, which is a conceded articulation of the AF in the context of the DA. That might sound absurd, but y'all good check out the truth that does. So you have to consider this as true, which means that even if there's some spin that like conservative spin is like acceding to environmental regulations, California will literally approve a bunch of pipelines and export materials for export to China, which conservatives obviously like because they love the U.S. and want us to be energy dominant. That takes out the true articulation plans of environmental overreach. The public and releasing the plans of reversal of Biden's rejection of oil. They have read their own evidence, like the 1 and C, that Biden's reversal on oil is good for his popularity, and frame this with the immediate implications of the plan. As so, will people be upset that the FERC takes state interest into account if it results in 50 gas pipelines immediately coming online, increasing U.S. energy production? Obviously, people wouldn't be mad. We have a number of pieces of evidence that proves energy production increase are massively popular right now. First, they drop popular from Title 42. So 77% think energy US needs to actively increase pipelines to meet energy demand, combine inflation. Proves the constituents of both sides recognize Plan C. Second, are enough evidence. Incredibly well warranted. It's from 2 weeks ago, and it's everybody from every part loves the plan. Democrats say we need to increase oil. Third, Manchin specifically, this is Democratic unity. We see that Manchin is the key internal link. Our evidence is that Manchin is livid right now with pipeline blocking. They love action to contrary, which 2AC evidence specifically says for cuts now. They cohesively did not extend a link to the plan. They've asserted that the TMZ the plan is oil regulation, but they have evidence saying oil bad. They see vote for the move. They can see that because it's a good vote for the group. We perceive as major good faith move about it, that we open up 50 pipelines and compromise inflation. And they see if they found better proposals hated by Democrats. They didn't want to explain why Democrats hate oil. This like PC theory stuff. PC might be good, but it's not a magic wand. They have their own evidence. It's uncertain whether Manchin will vote on it right now. None of their PC evidence that Manchin will certainly be swayed, which means that there's at least some question of uniqueness, which means all the link tunes have at least some risk of offense and massively lower this DA. They've gone for oil controversial without reading any evidence saying that this oil is controversial. They can't just like win this debate on spin alone. Like they have evidence that like Republicans even perceive it as like acceding to liberals, so they can't win. Good debate.
Yeah, great debate. Thank you all for Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want us to make a card doc?
Cool. We'll make one. Ask card docs consent.
Negative card docs just got sent to.
Okay, we're all in. Is Vikram here?
I think 1 second. I thought he's texting me. I think he's getting back to his computer. Cool. I think he's here now. He's here now.
Okay. Congratulations to both teams on reaching the octafinals of the TOC. You're both excellent, and this is a very close debate. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative.
ISAT, Bellarmine, I don't know whether you all are seniors or not. Okay, so, I mean, this was a fantastic debate, and it's totally up to you whether you want to hear decisions from anybody or not, whether you want to like celebrate with your families or teams. But you should be, yeah.
Yeah, if you can, I would like to hear the decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll make it short. I thought that the counterplan solved a lot of this advantage, and that's where I started. I didn't think this AF deficit was doing very much. I think this card says that protesters want environmental concerns to be taken into account, but found the neg argument persuasive that the second plank of the counterplan would resolve that concern by creating a clear regulatory structure for pipelines, as well as the other planks that attempt to solve warming by fiating like energy transitions and stuff like that, which the 2NR says would create support for the counterplan, and don't think the first plank about just like approving or like dropping their objections to the pipeline projects were really answered very well. And I don't think the permutation makes very much sense or isn't explained that way. And then on the DA, I think uniqueness is heavily neg, so it's kind of hard to vote on just this link turn alone, and found the neg explanation of the link more persuasive. My problem with this turn is just like timing. The pipeline approvals are a fiated mandated or not a fiated mandate of the plan. You've read like solvency evidence, but they might happen. But the plan itself isn't like approve 50 pipelines. It's incorporate consideration of state environmental concerns in pipeline approvals, which the neg is controlling a story on. It looks like, wolf in sheep's clothing, seen as a liberal disguise to uphold every liberal state's environmental policies, et cetera, et cetera. And then that coupled with like a strong neg push on PC solves every problem with uniqueness made me like pretty confidently neg on, or big risk of the DA and not a lot of advantage after the counterplan.
I can go next. I think collaborative LNG regulations has a possibility of avoiding nationwide backlash to local infrastructure projects. And this takes precedence over the possibility of its immediate passage derailing the San nomination. So the one place I would differ is this local opposition deficit. The AF suggests that a unilateral local only approval of LNG exports will inflame protesters and cost sectors upwards of $40 billion. And the Zimmerman card supports this description that the AF suggested. The negative is 3 arguments here, fiat solves, the counterplan implements LNG regulations, so no protests. And lastly, there's no impact. I think the first is the link to the solvency deficit, because the counterplan would enforce the regulations that people don't want. And the last one is just flat out disputed by the card, the affirmative reach, which lists the dollar figure for people stonewalling these projects. The second argument actually gave me a little bit of pause. I do think the counterplan's second plank would be more palatable to these tree huggers who want to blow up these LNG projects in the status quo. But I'm persuaded by the 1AR and 2AR's federal crackdown argument, which is supported by this piece of Zimmerman evidence, at least in the middle part. The counterplan exceeds the standards that are currently set by the FRSC. That's in the books now, which is hotly contested and likely to generate political backlash because they're not stringent enough. Or they'll attempt to implement new regulations on top of these LNG projects, which will either delay them or get preempted by federal agencies, which was identified the 2AR by these rather hyperbolic descriptions of the CIA cracking down on adding these new regulations on these projects. So given that, right, I do think there's a deficit, and the deficit's quantifiable. Like some were around like 40 billion, like per like LNG project that we try to implement. We'd face some kind of local backlash that would, derail our ability to create energy independence and solve an EU conflict. And in terms of the DA, like the real only thing that the AF contests is like the link, and I'm not really sure if there's like a offensive turn. The neg, for really a lack of better terms, has like a content agnostic link argument that like any bill that shows up and Biden pushes will like force him to expend political capital. But I'm not like entirely persuaded by like the fact that like whatever policy passes, like the content of it doesn't matter. I think the negative suggests that we need to like convince some like person on the opposite ideological bloc to believe, to gain some kind of political like, kind of capital in some sense. And I don't think that's, I think the AF's like, I think the plan is not a policy that would be particularly unpopular that would force Biden to expend that political capital. I think, everyone kind of agrees that LNG policies are like overwhelmingly popular with like, the Republicans, and, the AF is interested in EPSET to suggest that negative kind of concedes it. But to be frank, I don't really think any of this really matters because, the counterplan would also like open up these LNG facilities, but through a bottom-up approach. So the only thing that's left of this DA now is like the difference between the states doing it and the federal government. And like you have like this slim, like, marginal, like immediacy link that, doesn't really pair well against like the AF's quantifiable solvency deficit of the counterplan. So more or less, I think, deficit outweighs whatever's left of this like, sliver of a link argument that has nothing to do with the AF's LNG policy and only to do with the fact that it happens now and Biden's pushing it. So I know it was kind of long-winded. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, but I'll let Yao go.
I voted AF. I think the counterplan has a large solvency deficit, and I think the risk to this ad is low for the negative, and so the EU cohesion impact outweighs. It's interesting to listen to the other two because I think neither team is debating the solvency question in either direction with a tremendous amount of clarity or great evidence comparison. And for me, this left me having to read the Zimmerman card, look at the text of the counterplan, and figure out for a fairly long time. I thought at the end of the 2NR, probably at the end of the 2AR, I thought I was probably leaning negative unless this evidence is really good. But I think that's the Zimmerman evidence is that states are currently motivated to protect the environment through stricter regulations on LNG pipelines than what the federal government is currently willing to approve. So basically, like states set a higher floor than the federal government, but without the ability to meaningfully influence the federal government, states will then work to, quote, subvert federal authority of those pipelines by exercising their veto power. It becomes, I think, more complicated in this situation because the first plank of the counterplan fiats that states reduce their use of vetoes, despite the fact that they want to set a higher floor for protection, which is established in Zimmerman. Zimmerman says that local environmental movements, if they believe that projects are being greenlit without their concerns heard, either because the federal government doesn't hear them and states do hear them but have no power, or like the federal government and states both don't give a shit, so that no one's hearing it, will then aggressively protest in a way that causes, quote, LNG proponents to scale back or cancel those projects. The counterplan still triggers those NIMBY movements that cancel projects because the first plank to reduce vetoes makes state governments act against the interests of those environmental groups. So now neither state nor federal governments listen to their concerns. The second plank doesn't solve because it only clarifies regulatory standards and rules for LNG infrastructure. This results in two problems that are negative. The first is that the way the second plank is worded doesn't require stricter environmental standards, just clarification of regulations. A regulation obviously can be clarified to be less environmentally protective or more environmentally protective. So it's unclear why it necessarily makes it environmentally protective. But second, even if the second plank does guarantee clarifying regulations in a way that makes them more environmentally protective across the board, it just means states then raise the floor for the level of protection in the world of the counterplan. But the counterplan still doesn't require the federal government to incorporate those concerns. And if the federal government doesn't do so, the first plank still makes states approve those pipelines anyway that they want to veto, and that they've raised environmental standards, which should require them to veto, but they don't because they have to green light them. So essentially, if the second plank does result in more environmentally protective regulations, that just doubles down the status quo where there's already a gap, right, between the floor level of state environmental protections and what the federal government wants to do. But then the first plank just guarantees less vetoes. So I don't know why NIMBY movements that wouldn't protest now because they feel moderately appeased that the state government is like working their interest wouldn't just be more inflamed in the world of the counterplan, because even if the counterplan resulted in more environmentally strict standards, it doesn't take any action on those, nor does it require the federal government to take any action on those. So the end result is that those NIMBY movements just get more mad in the world of the counterplan. Fiat doesn't solve those protests. Durable fiat means regulations get enforced and not rolled back. But durable fiat doesn't mean that protesters get shot by the FBI. I think it's also fairly likely that if the government just like uses police to violently crack down on protests, those protests probably become more inflamed rather than go away. But more importantly, Zimmerman's impact to protests isn't that protests cost regulations to be rolled back, which I think is solved by durable fiat, but rather that protests cause companies and investors, i.e. LNG proponents, that want to build the LNG pipelines to cancel those projects because they don't want to deal with like the PR disaster, which obviously isn't something you can durably fiat away because it's a choice made by those proponents, the investors, right? Not a choice made by a government that the negative gets the ability to fiat. At this point, I think the counterplan might still solve some of the F, especially sort of in the immediate term, because it immediately approves a bunch of these 20 pipelines that are, let's say, currently stalled through the first plank. But if that immediacy triggers NIMBY protest backlash, and then the cancellation of a ton of those pipelines, I just concluded there's like a very large risk of a solvency deficit, and the counterplan doesn't therefore increase LNG exports much more than the status quo. I think it could be persuaded that, hey, if you just solve in the short term, the perception of short-term greenlighting of those protests, like NIMBY movements maybe take time, and greenlighting those protests in the short term creates an immediate jolt or something that solves the first advantage. But obviously, I think the negative just concluded that the counterplan solved all the F and didn't couch the solvency deficit in a way where it's like, hey, there's a chance NIMBY movements will still happen. You should still conclude it solves the majority of the F. The majority of the F is still sufficient to take out the first advantage. Here's the reasons why. And so at the point where I conclude there's a large solvency deficit, neither team is doing like comparative impact work that assumes that. And so I'm sort of left my own devices. I think that the counterplan doesn't solve a majority of the F, even if it solves some of the F. At this point, I thought, well, I guess I'll just judge take the counterplan because there's still a chance that this disad just outweighs the case. But on the disad, I think the risk of this link turn is probably higher than the risk of the link. The F's evidence is just much more specific to both fossil fuel exports and to Manchin. The 2AC Aronoff evidence says that Democrats specifically want to drill more in order to get more energy to Europe. And it is in the context of Russia invading Ukraine, which changes Democratic calculation because they would have previously been pro-environment and less in favor of the plan. The 2AC Joselau evidence says Manchin specifically wants Biden to take action to greenlight stalled fossil fuel projects in the slope. By comparison, the next evidence is decent for the topic, but it's just much more generic to this F. The F doesn't appear to amend the CWA, which is one of the one in our cards. It is not a radical climate change bill, which is another one in our card. And it isn't or prioritizing endangered species protection over agricultural concerns, which is the one in Z-Link card. Of the other two link cards that the one in our reads, one is this like very short red re-highlighting of the Kloss evidence that they kind of don't know what to make of. It is highlighted to say, you know, Congress listened to some concerns, but then it like sided with the federal government. I just don't know what to make of this. The other one is about Republicans opposing state authority. I think that might be true, but that doesn't align with the uniqueness debate in a way that's helpful for the negative, because both teams have read evidence on uniqueness that agrees with each other, that it is possible for Biden to get the Sohn nomination through, but only if he convinces and holds moderate Democrats, because it is going to be at best 50-50 for Sohn. And it is more important to prevent any moderate Democratic defections than to get Republicans who are opposed to Sohn anyway. But the negative evidence, even if they read more principal evidence, the only sort of recent card is about the same time. It's like this handle card. So it's like the same card as the app is reading. And it's like, it's possible to get Manchin, but it's going to require the exercise of PC. Even the 2NR's uniqueness explanation isn't like the Manchin vote is locked in, but it's like, hey, we have read predictive evidence that says if he has PC now, he could convince Manchin. But only the app has evidence about how moderate Democrats feel about the plan, and in particular, somebody like Manchin. It's just not clear to me if the 2AR's like extended the uniqueness debate or not, because it's spent so little time there. But I'm inclined to think that the risk of this link turn is much larger than the risk of a link. And even if I concluded, let's say there wasn't an explicit extension that the disad is non-unique, worst case for the app, the risk of this disad is very low for the negative, because I think the link debate is fairly decisive for the affirmative. The case debate, there is no defense to the EU cohesion scenario. The Rodriguez evidence that the 2NC reads is about US-Russia nuclear war, which isn't one of the laundry list of impacts in this 1AC impact card about EU cohesion. the argument about Nord Stream being canceled, that just provides uniqueness because the internal link to EU cohesion is about high energy prices, which would be higher if you canceled Nord Stream, but would only come down if the US can provide energy to replace what the Russians would have provided with Nord Stream, right? Which means that both the status quo and the counterplan cannot provide that LNG energy because they both don't approve or result in enough LNG pipelines. But only the app does, and there's no terminal impact defense. So I thought the case outweighs the dissent, even if I were to take the counterplan.
Thanks for all the feedback. We're gonna go prep for our
Yeah.
next round, but thank you so much.
Fantastic debate, y'all.
Yeah, good luck,
Good debate.
for judging.
Thank you for judging. The RPs made sense.